So in episode 26, I spoke about what it was like to deal with the understanding and the recognition that my son was autistic and was diagnosed with ADHD. And one of the things that I also realized as we went through major testing with him at the time was that I myself also was ADHD. My dad was also diagnosed with ADD as well in his 60s and autism. And so I looked at some things in my own history and I was like, gosh, I can see where that hyper-focused ADD kind of moved into unhealthy behaviors. And so I think back to a specific time period. I was a junior in high school and my girlfriend was in a cheerleading competition. It was over the mountains from Seattle into Eastern Washington. And so she invited her two best friends, me and this other gal. And so we went with her mom and her aunt to watch her do this cheerleading competition. And here I was, a junior in high school, and we were all sharing a hotel room together. So me and my other best friend sleeping in one bed, and then mom and the aunt were in the other. And I woke up that night with a little bit of a cough. I wasn't sick. I wasn't getting sick, but all of a sudden implanted in my mind was this thought of, oh, what if I cough all night? What if I wake them up? And so I started feeling this sense of anxiety and actually dread. And I remember getting up out of bed, I went into the bathroom and I sat there and I thought, well, what if I just sit here all night? What if I don't go back out there? Because if I cough, then it will wake them up. And I started to just have this really unhealthy but overwhelming sense of dread that I was going to somehow destroy their wonderful night of sleep. And I can absolutely look back at that moment as the starting point of all the significant sleep issues that I've had over the course of my life. I'm now 45. I was a junior in high school, so I would have been 16 at the time. And I wonder to myself, why? Why did I have these thoughts? And why did it perpetuate so much? And of course, as my son went through his testing, I realized a lot of that was based in this hyper-focused ADD part of this spectrum that me as a family, my dad's side of the family, we battle with. And my guest today is going to talk about what it's like to battle with some of those things, because, there's a lot of anxiety that goes around these feelings that we have. We think we can think our way through it. We think a lot of different things, but we still battle. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I am super excited to introduce to you my guests. So Kelsey Chapman, she is an author, a podcaster, and a personal cheerleader to women who are building their dream life and business. That's my kind of woman. That's why she's on today. And when she first launched her brand in 2015, she felt this overwhelming feeling too. It was scary. It was a huge leap of faith, to commit to showing up for a dream that she really didn't know if it was going to pan out or not. And it was mentorship that really pushed her to rise up and continuing to make her dream a reality. And so over the first few years of business, she has leaned on the shoulders of several incredible mentors who took her under their wing and taught her how to make this jump from dreamer to doer. That's what we're going to also talk about. Kelsey needed their expert wisdom to shift this old mindset and perspective to discover the next right steps that would help her execute the vision that she had, stay hopeful throughout the long and sometimes painful journey as you're launching something new. And her mentors helped her shape her character so she could become the CEO and leader that she is today. Now she is excited to pay it forward and be the cheerleader for you too, because she believes that you can turn your wildest dreams into a reality. My wonderful new friend, Kelsey Chapman, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
I am excited to have you. Well, before we get into today's topic, why don't you tell us what was the song that you brought to add to our Overcomer playlist, and why'd you pick it?
Oh man, well, I love the song Rhythms of Grace, which was fun for me to hear that you knew. It's by Hillsong United. For me, I am always on a quest towards peace, which I am sure we will get into lots of reasons for that, um, have just always sent me on a path towards pursuing peace. And so rhythms are really important in my life. I am not necessarily prone to rhythms. I'm actually prone to compulsively doing all day, every day. And so over the last few years, I've been on this quest to just integrate rhythms into my life, to grow, to cultivate peace, to create margin, to create rest. And so I love this song all about rhythms of grace, how to operate out of that grace that we are freely given.
Right.
But sometimes I don't always, take hold of. And so I just lean into that song on a day where I need to be reminded the beauty of and the rhythms of grace.
Yeah. Was there any specific lines from that song that really stand out to you that you had queued up? And if you don't, that's okay too.
Well, I just like this phrase, your voice calls the stars by their name. You whisper them all to their place. Like that level of like, oh, I can rest. Like the stars, the millions of stars in the universe are each strategically put into place. Like I don't have to control everything. I don't have to be a part or be the puppet master of every little detail in life. I can relax. I can lean in, I can create margin, I can create rhythms, and I can lean into that grace. I don't have to do it all, even though sometimes I swing on a pendulum of thinking I do have to do it all.
Or that you can do it all.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, I love that. And I do love that song. I love that whole album. I was talking in my intro story about my battles with insomnia and these overwhelming thoughts of anxiety, which have led to major sleep issues and really sleep disorders over the years. And one of the things that you were talking about, and I know that we're going to talk about today, is you have battled some similar issues. And I guess why I felt it was so important when you told me kind of some things that you were thinking about talking about, why this one stood out to me in particular wasn't because I had dealt with something in the past that was similar to it. It was that you were willing to talk about something that you have battled recently. And I wanted to have you talk about that because I think a lot of times we as women, we're afraid to talk about the things we are currently dealing with, or that we have maybe just stepped out of, not like, oh, that was something I dealt with 10 years ago and I barely know that girl. There's something about being vulnerable enough to say, this is something I've recently been working myself through. And these are the things that I have done. So why don't you kind of start us off? And, if you want to go back in some history, or if you just want to kind of start with COVID and how maybe that started to trigger some things, where do you want to go from here?
Absolutely. Well, I'll just start by saying, I have dealt with fear for as far back as I can remember. There was no, big moment that was the catalyst to this fear. I would just say that from the time I can have first tangible memories, I've been deeply afraid, especially at night. I felt out of control and unsafe, even though I had a relatively safe home in a very safe neighborhood and a good part of town. I'm not exactly sure why, but that has just been how I'm wired since the very beginning. And so, as I went through childhood, that fear took a lot of different shapes. For a long time, it was kidnappers. Then it was, unseen things like spiritual demons or whatever. I didn't even grow up in church. I don't even know where those fears came from. Probably commercials, movies, who knows? But I was just deeply afraid. And, for a season, it was of physical things and it was of spiritual things. I just really was fixated on that, hyper focus, like you said, all day and all night. All day I was dreading nighttime. I could fall back asleep during the day. I felt safe. I felt okay. I would create rituals to feel safe. And then by night, though, I'd stay up all night. I'd just stay up all night. Into college, I would stay up all night because I was so scared of what could happen at night that I never wanted to close my eyes or relax enough to fall asleep because I needed to be hyper vigilant, aware always on guard for what could happen to me. And so what I didn't know at the time was I was starting to develop OCD to cope with my fears. And really, there were other factors in my life. You know, every family has heartache. We're not exempt from getting through this life without pain. No one's exempt, right?
Sure.
But I really reacted to the unique brand of heartache my family was experiencing by developing these rituals of control to make me feel stable. And so in times where I felt unstable, whether that was at night when I was scared or just because of an encounter I had with a family member, or, you know, because I, you know, couldn't control my environment at all times, I started developing these mechanisms of control.
Right.
So what that would look like for me would be like feeling every wall before bed, to feel for an invisible person hiding there, you know, so that I could go to sleep. And while that's obviously not rational, at the time it felt deeply rational for me. I would have this ritual every night through my high school years for 45 minutes, every closet, every attic. You know, I was sitting watching a show with my mom a few years ago, you know, in my late 20s. And there was a kid that the punchline of the scene in the show was, oh my God, this kid has OCD. And it was illustrated in a funny way. It was like
Sure.
American Housewife. It was a funny show. And I looked at my mom and I was like, Mom, that was me. I would check under the bed, not one time, but 7 times. And I needed to like go back and check again until it felt just right. And I was like, was I OCD? And she was like, oh God, yeah. And I was like, wait, what? And, you know, I kind of put that away. Like I really didn't explore the potential of OCD until about a year ago. But it's not like I have these tendencies of organizing my kitchen perfectly. I think that's the pretty.
It's like, I was OCD over the weekend, or when the people make it all sexy and wonderful.
Yes, that's the pretty stereotype of OCD that's not really OCD. And so,
right, exactly.
You know, I'd only ever really seen that. So I didn't think to call any of these rituals OCD. I just knew I did that. And when I did that, it made me feel maybe not better, but like something shifted, you know, like it's not like it completed my life and made me feel safe that I had that semblance of control, but in that moment, I would do whatever my ritual was till it felt right. I'd have some relief, then I'd move on. Mm-hmm. And then it got to a point where I couldn't carry on my day without doing those rituals,
right.
which is very, very symbolic of OCD. I just didn't know that's what it was.
Right.
Then, you know, I go through my 20s and it starts shifting into A+ student habits. And so I've always been an A+ student. I graduated high school with like a year of college under my belt already.
Wow.
I am the A+ student. I want the gold stars. And so it was also kind of masked in this star student behavior. And as I shifted out of my high school years and started having probably a little more control in my life anyway,
sure,
just with that agency you have as you get older,
of course,
it started translating into achievement. And oh my gosh, I can't do this until I complete every item on this list. And I can't go to bed if this list is incomplete.
And your world, I bet started to, or continued to fan the flames of your value, totally. Your value. Oh, it's like, oh, I get good feedback when I do this. So it perpetuates the issue too.
Yeah. You're rewarded for your behavior. And so of course you continue. Of course you don't see it as a problem. And so I really just shifted all of my OCD tendencies towards achievement, towards schools and work. You know, I was still battling with fear, but somehow probably because of the public humiliation of like, I can't be in college filling my wall every night before bed with my roommates. Sure. You know, I'm sure there were seasons, I remember seasons feeling my roommates bedroom walls when they were not there to just double check before bed. But like at some point that becomes weird. And
yeah. You know what? I have to tell you, because same thing with college roommates. This is total relatability is that, so I played volleyball at the University of Washington. So we would travel and we always had a roommate, and I would literally have to wait until my roommate fell asleep. And I would oftentimes, if we had a room that had like a separate other seating area where there was a couch, I would sleep on the couch. And because it was like, I wanted to get as far away from the bed as where they were, because it was this completely irrational fear that I was going to cough. I was going to keep them up. I was going to do this thing. And yet I would do these things where I'd sleep on the floor, or I would literally like leave and go sleep in the car. It's like, how embarrassing can it get? People are like, what is wrong with you? There's a perfectly good bed for you to sleep in here, but try to tell somebody that that's irrational and actually trying to live through it. So I can so relate to the way you're feeling.
It's like this primal instinct of like, this is the safest route. I have to take the safest route in those moments. And so I think that's what eventually broke the feeling every wall before bed habit of just like, okay, I can't always do this. And well, that was one night, that was 2 nights not performing that ritual to go to sleep, and I survived. And then you kind of fizzle out. And so over time my tendencies shifted into those star student behaviors. And then as an adult, I ended up starting my own business. And in the last few years, I've really noticed I will just stay up till 1 a.m. midnight all the time to complete my to-do list. But the problem is the to-do list restarts the next morning, or it's never complete. But I literally feel like I'm dying if it's incomplete going to bed. And the level of mental space that it takes up in my day, I realized that was my newest iteration of control. And I was talking to my therapist, I discovered these OCD markers. I was in like my 9th year of therapy at that point. So I've been pursuing help for all the nuances of the messy parts of my life for 10 years, but we really didn't even touch OCD till year 9. And I can't remember what it was that encouraged me to explore it. Oh, I do remember I was listening to a podcast, and it was a Dax Shepard podcast, and he regularly talks about OCD. And he was talking to a guest who had been through significant trauma and asked them, did you develop OCD tendencies when you felt out of control because of that trauma? Did you develop some sort of control to placate your lack of control in life? And I'd had, when a topic comes up just time and time and time again for a while, and you're like, maybe I should explore that. That was one of those moments of like, I relate every time he says this. He'll talk about going to the bathroom, and literally he would have to do this ritual and walk into the hallway with the toilet paper roll and all the sheets, and then let it all unravel and then fold it back up, and just have these totally crazy extreme rituals as a child. And I'm like, I so relate to that. I had these insane rituals. And so I started exploring it, and a friend sent me an account called OCD Ever After or something. It's like a therapist account. And when they started talking about intrusive thoughts, I had no idea intrusive thoughts are a hallmark of OCD. I literally thought I had no word for what intrusive thoughts might have been. I just spent my whole life feeling guilty for having intrusive thoughts.
What is it? To give us the definition of what does that mean?
Gosh, you can be thinking about something totally different, and then a horrific image will come into your mind. And then you have to create little checks to make sure you're not bad because you had that bad thought. And so you create these rituals to make sure and to check yourself that you're not bad because you had a bad thought. And they're totally uncharacteristic of who you are or your belief system sometimes. And I spent a lot of my life praying for forgiveness for intrusive thoughts that I thought I just must have invited in. I really had no words for it until I was literally 30 years old. I had no idea that's a thing. Again, I'm sitting here thinking OCD is organizing your kitchen. So I didn't really have a grid for what this was. And the funny thing was, is I started talking to a friend about this the other day, and she said too, oh my gosh, Kelsey, I learned I had OCD in the last few years. And it was the intrusive thoughts that kept me quiet, because I just thought, I'm so bad. Again, you don't realize it's OCD. Once you have a name for it, you're like, oh, a lot of people have OCD.
Sure.
But when you don't have a name for it, you just think, this is so isolating. I don't even know how to describe this.
Yeah. And when you haven't actively begun to understand it and research it, because, I think it's so interesting. You said you had been in counseling in therapy for years, and the OCD conversation had never come up. And I relate to the fact that I had been in counseling for years, and the codependent growing up in an alcoholic home tendency that I had never come up. And I was almost angry when actually I did. I had like a few weeks of anger, because I'm like, why didn't anybody tell me to start researching this? This would have been so helpful for me. All the initial reactions, because it was so obvious to me once I started researching what it is to be a codependent and need that behavioral feedback from other people to feel either valuable or like crap. And yet, I don't know if I just wasn't ready to hear it, if I wasn't ready to process that part, because I do have a hard time imagining codependency never came up over years of being in counseling with different people and talking about my history and things of that nature. But it's interesting that you say you were in there for a long time, and then that came up. And then you started to explore it. So I think that that's important just to pull out, because I think a lot of people feel the same way I did. Kind of like, I feel like somebody didn't tell me the truth. Like I should have known, or somebody should have brought it to my attention. And yet I might have just not been ready to hear it or to address it. You know what I mean?
Totally. And when you're high functioning in anything, you are able to mask it a little bit well. And so sometimes, the therapist or the friend is just dealing with what's right in front of them. Okay, today you're in pain over X, Y, and Z. And we're going to address that. And what's the root of that? And we can spend 9 months before you know it, diving into whatever was that pain point.
Good point.
And
yes.
Then you go years masking a big problem that is in the ecosystem of every part of who you are. And yeah, I really am like, how was this missed? Why didn't anyone tell me? Even a friend who, not the same friend, a different friend is OCD. And when I told her, she was like, that's what I have. I just didn't have words to describe it to my friends. And the intrusive images were so awful in her experience that she felt embarrassed. And I'm like, oh, I wish she would have said something, because I would have known that that's what I was going through. Yeah. And so I think like the people who don't recognize it sometimes, or who know and don't say anything, they're just trying to figure out how to navigate it themselves. But it was enlightening. I discovered this after 10 years of therapy at like 29 or 30, and here we are. And it was, I'm not just saying like, let's slap a label on everything. But for me, it was very freeing of like, oh, I'm not isolated in this. A lot of people are OCD, and okay, like I have a name for it. This is
and
not
I can start,
something...
and I can start figuring it out, start reading what other people have done, find out what worked for them. Did you feel that it was, when COVID hit and life just kind of spun out of control very quickly for all of us? Because especially for those of us who have controlling type behaviors, who want to control their situation, who don't like to feel out of control. That was a very, very hard for me initially, because I love routine. I mean, that is, very much a part of who I am, and the achievement and checking off the list, all the things that you've talked about too. And so feeling this, I have to kind of reinvent how we do business, how we generate leads for our company. I was speaking, every other week. And then that, of course, overnight, I haven't spoken on stage in 12 official months as of last week, which is so strange. And so all these changes, people having to go work from home, kids being at home, all this kind of stuff. Did you feel that perpetuated or increased some of the issues that you dealt with, or maybe new ones cropped up because of that?
I think they definitely cropped up because my husband did lose his job in like the second month. So like in April. So my fears of being out of control really crept in then.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say about a year before April of 2019, I was running an Instagram agency, and one algorithm shift leveled my business overnight. And so I really did a lot of work then on what do you do when the rug's pulled out from under you. I went from $20,000 months to zero, and it was a huge opportunity for me to do a lot of the work of letting go of control. And will I be okay if my income's not predictable? Or will I be okay if it all disappears? So when my husband lost his job due to COVID, I had done a lot of the foundational work the year prior when my business disappeared. And so it was actually a testament of like, wow, that work is paying off. I would never like a test, quote unquote, to see if the work I've done has paid off.
Sure.
You know, a lot of the times we start doing the work and we don't know when we're going to have to put it to use. Of like, okay, I started digging deep. I started therapy on my fear of losing control of my business, or, you know, some unforeseen factor affecting my bottom line. But then that happened, and I didn't end up having to live on my friends' couches, which was, you know, like yeah. somewhat of my greatest fear.
Sure.
And we survived. I rebuilt. And so then when it happened during COVID, again, just to my husband, I was like, you know what? We did it last year. We can do it again.
Sure.
And there are some days that are better than others. Some days I start wanting to control of like, have you applied to 5 jobs a day? I have only seen you apply to 2. So you should apply to 8 to make up for the lost ones you didn't do yesterday. I start to really intervene in his life. I start working frantically in my life to make more money to offset things. But I've realized like it usually does come out in the wash. I've never gone hungry. I can go get a job if I have to, if I need to, you know, table my business. We can do that. And so I just have to really placate myself with like rational thoughts in those moments and not allow myself to develop the compulsive behaviors, because once I start, I will do my rituals for years. And so for me, that looks like setting really strong boundaries to not slip into control, like close my computer at 6. For me, this has been a season where I can't close my computer at 6. Once I got an OCD diagnosis, I was like, okay, this won't just go away because I want it to go away.
Sure.
I have to ruthlessly go after this and set extreme boundaries in my life, because if it wasn't for, you know, having roommates, I'd still be feeling every wall in my house before bed.
Sure. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's like getting up. I just heard from one of my coaches, literally getting up, shutting the computer lid and saying out loud, work complete. And literally doing that as a ritual, because as entrepreneurs, it's very easy, especially with the internet too. I mean, now you have access to everything at every hour of the day. And there's always a task list. Just like you said, no matter how hard you work, there is always a new task list tomorrow morning. You know what I'm saying? And so being able to have those rituals, I think that's really, really good that you said that. Those boundaries of saying, okay, I'm going to put something in place that is going to be my trigger to stop. Doesn't mean it's going to feel natural.
For a season, it's like, maybe I need to go on a walk. Maybe I need to go on a drive. Sometimes I change like what my ritual might be, but I have to have something that like cultivates a shift. Because when I work for myself, I don't have the drive home to learn to shut off. And so, and for me, I get that little dopamine hit, that fix when I check one more task off my list. And I am rewarded when I check one more task off my list. But overall, my life is not rewarded when I'm a total slave to compulsive behavior. And so it has been a lot of boundaries to create healthy rhythms in my life.
No, that's so true. You know, and that's why really for all of us, having those 3 top things that you're going to accomplish that day and identifying what those are, because you can easily have 20 things on a task list. And I love checking off task lists as much as you do, but I had to really get very, very diligent about that, saying, I'm waking up in the morning. What are the 3 most important things that are going to truly make me feel like I have accomplished the things I needed to do? Because I could easily go to an Outlook task list and put 20 things that I'm going to do today on it. And it's just so I can have the act of clicking a box
Yep.
and getting that dopamine hit that I did something. And it's like, yeah, but did you really do something that was beneficial, or did you do something that you could have delegated to somebody else, or was a very low priority? You're still going to get to the end of the day and not feel accomplished because you didn't do the most important tasks, so to speak.
Yep. I love the 3 tasks, the power hour per se of accomplishing tasks in the morning, because I too will just I'll drive down the road and have an idea, dump it in my notepad, dump it in my notepad. And before you know it, there's 45 tasks there. Of course, that's never going to get complete. And so really prioritizing and letting go, like really relinquishing the need to complete everything, and finding other ways to placate my need for control in life without giving in to controlling behavior. It is discipline every single day.
How have you been easy on yourself? Because, this isn't, again, this isn't like, you're doing something like, oh, I'm going to shave off 15 pounds. I'm going to hit my goal and I'm going to move on to something else or whatever it is. This is something that you're dealing with. This is something that you will be dealing with throughout your life, and you understand that. But how have you gone easy on yourself, knowing that this is something that is a continual issue that you have to be mindful of and work through? But have you learned, maybe your self-talk? What is that? How has that changed over the years?
My self-talk, it really swings on a pendulum of like overly nice. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm pretty like, woohoo! But then because of OCD, slip into some very Enneagram 1 behaviors. And I really swing between like everything's great to nothing's great overnight. And so for me, I have to understand that because of the nature of even my work, there's probably going to be seasons where I slip into a lot more rigid forms of OCD because a deadline's happening and it has to get done. So I am going to be addicted to my to-do list. I'm going to have to remedy that when that season closes. For instance, during my book launch, there's no closing the computer at 6 o'clock on some days. And I knew that might escalate my kind of addiction to my to-do list because it does have to be done. This is a season for hustle and running. But when that season's over, I'm going to have to build in some ways to reset. So I'm going to the beach next week. And I don't go till Monday, and I'm closing my computer Friday so that I can start winding down, because I fully expect it to be a little bit painful to not be able to work those first few days. It'll be like, oh, but if I just do this one thing, I'll feel better. Right. But I know I won't feel better in the long haul. I'll feel better temporarily. Right. And so it's going to take a few days to unwind and to come down. Then I can shift into a new rhythm, get in vacation mode, and hopefully come back and be in normal work hours again. Okay.
I commend you. That's so good. That is so good. I want to make sure I know I can pull out how important that is, what you said, and that you are making the decision not only to have this season of running hard, because there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being out of balance for a time, knowing that it has an end date. That's the important part. It's like, I know that right now that this is just what I need to do, but then for you to have the wisdom to say, okay, now plan something at the end of it, and then to build in 2 days of margin. Girl, I am impressed. That is a big deal, to build in the margin to get ready to unplug. That's awesome.
Well, haven't you been on vacation before where you like really don't unwind till like day 6 and you go home on day 7?
It sucks. What was the point of that vacation when that happens? That is the worst feeling. And I have so been there. And I know I know there's a woman out there who hears this. She's like, oh my gosh, how many vacations have I wasted?
And I know Saturday is going to roll around and I'm going to be bored.
Yeah.
And because I'm not on vacation yet, I'm not having fun yet. I'm like, what do I do? Twiddle my thumbs around the house? Like, I'm bored. Should I fill my time going to visit people or running errands to make life easier? And it's like, no, I actually need to be still and find something that is a hobby and not work around the house. If I want to see a friend, great, but I don't need to stack my calendar with 7 friends to placate my need to be busy and feel productive, quote unquote. So I need to ease in, embrace the discomfort of not being quote unquote productive and getting that hit this weekend. And then hopefully by Monday when I start traveling, I can somewhat, I'm not letting myself take my computer.
Good
my
for
husband
you.
does have to work, but he's like, you're bringing 2 to 3 books and I want you to complete those by the end.
I am just so proud of you. Because I am such a kindred spirit. Oh my goodness, your life and the things that drive you to do some of the things you do. I'm like, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. And I am just so proud of you to have really worked so hard. I mean, you have strived to build around the tools that you have that you currently are using to ease into that rest and to build out the life that you still want, and then to still enjoy the fruits of your labor of all that work and the book launch and the book and all the great things that come along with it. But life isn't just about a task list. I mean, you know that just as well as I am. I mean, true happiness it's not found there. It's through our relationships. It is great to accomplish great things, but it's about leaving a legacy. It's about impacting the people around you. It's about taking the things that have hurt you in the past and being able to utilize those to help other people who are struggling with the same thing. Man, I'm so proud of you. That's just awesome.
It's fun to chat with a kindred spirit because, I think sometimes my husband's like, chill out. Can't you just enjoy life?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not that simple, honey.
Right.
And I think there's probably listeners out there like us who it takes discipline to rest.
Right. That's very true. And my husband, he's a musician. He can transition from one thing to another very quickly without any challenge. And even my 13-year-old, it was funny. We were coming back from vacation. And when I'm on the plane, for me, that's my prime working time because I'm sitting in a chair. There's no place for me to go. I'm like, I'm going to work on updating my Quicken, and I'm going to be, clearing out all my emails because once I touch down, I don't want to have anything to do with any of my, any of my computer and all the work stuff. And he's like, Mom, just watch a movie. He just sat there and he kept looking over because it was making him feel anxious because I was working. And I said, Easton, right now, this is actually productive time for me. I had set it aside that I would be working on the plane because that's what I want to be doing, because now I know when I touch down in wherever I'm going to be, I'm going to have a lot more things to make me feel free to just leave it behind me. But it is challenging with people who can really transition easily, or they're not so task orient or accomplish driven. Again, one's not bad or good. It's just different. And we usually marry somebody who's not that same way.
A little bit different. Yep. Oh yeah.
So if you're looking back, I mean, during this time period, what would you say are a couple of the things, 2 or 3 things that you've really learned through this experience?
Man, that you don't have to struggle alone. I think for me, especially with those intrusive thoughts, that might feel like the biggest secret of my life. And so I just thought I was bad for having an intrusive thought. And then once I realized that the whole thing, I'm like, oh, why did I make that mean something about my identity or myself? If I would have even told 2 friends, they might have been able to identify, hey girl, that sounds a little bit like OCD. It was my other friend who let me in that I might be codependent. And so I think when you let people in and invite them into your struggle, no matter how vulnerable it feels, I am not putting that in a pretty little bow. It might be ugly.
Yeah.
But you're going to experience freedom when you invite people in. And I heard this said in college once, shame tries to keep you in the dark and tell you that it'll be better in the dark, but only when it's brought out into the light will you feel free. Yeah. But shame will try to convince you otherwise and keep you isolated and there in the dark. And so I wish I would have known that, because I tend to invite people into my life in every area, but that might have been the one that I just felt too afraid to invite someone in because I didn't know what it meant about me. And when I finally did, I was like, man, I should have done this a long time ago.
Isn't that so true?
That was a big lesson for me. And then boundaries for me has been very big. I thought being nice meant being unboundaried for so long. Unboundaried with people, unboundaried with tasks, unboundaried with my clients. And I got a lot of praise for just being available and on and a superstar. And that fed into my own issues of OCD, because again, I was getting rewarded for compulsively doing every second of every day. And by having no boundaries, it doesn't make you nicer. It makes you so stretched thin that you're mad at the world all the time.
Yep.
And so I just, these are the last 2 years of my life these last 2 years of my life have been about implementing boundaries. And it's allowed me to be kinder to myself, kinder to others, because I'm not snappy at the end of every day.
Right.
I'm not at that thing that I've been so excited to do and unable to enjoy it because I'm so stretched thin. I have no margin to enjoy it. Those things where you cram your life full of things you said yes to and you don't enjoy a single one of them anymore.
Right.
And so I think for me, the two things I've learned are just inviting people into those most vulnerable areas, and then setting boundaries, because it's not doing yourself any good to live unboundaried in order to be kind.
Right.
I think that's a box women get pushed into a lot.
Sure. Yep.
And it doesn't
or step right into, or they actively
Yes.
step right into it. And I'm right there. That's a very common trait with kids of alcoholics, that, they, just trying to keep the peace and don't speak up, and, very passive in a lot of things, and allow a lot of stuff to happen. And so weak boundaries have been something that I have had throughout my life, and realizing that true love for myself is when I could set a boundary, whether people like it or not, because that's my own self-care,
I could not relate more. With the things I've gone through with my family, I think it has really cultivated a lack of boundaries in my life. And it's been a really interesting season of unlearning those habits and implementing healthy habits. And one thing that I'm sure you'll relate to too, as my therapist was like, I kept pushing back and saying, I feel bad having a boundary, because it makes me feel like I'm causing the relationship to regress. If I set a boundary with someone I love, it kind of pushes them out of my inner circle box sometimes into an outer circle, unless they can meet me with my new boundaries. But if they don't respect that, we're not as close. Like, I don't like that. I don't want them to be not as close. And she said, you have to think about it differently. You have to think about it in the sense that you're fighting for a better relationship. It's not that you're regressing in your current relationship because you don't want it to be like that anymore. It's that you're fighting for it to be better, and anyone can get behind someone fighting for better connection.
Right. Although it always is very challenging in the beginning, because the feedback you're getting from the world around you, especially the people you're setting new boundaries with, is not positive, because of course now they're going, wait a second, what is this thing? Why are you being all like this? And whatever it is, but everybody get to a point where it makes way more sense. There were 2 podcasts. So it's funny that I downloaded in this last year. One is called Beyond Bitchy, and it's called Mastering the Art of Boundaries. And it's really specifically for women. And I think this is her 5th year or something like that. And so it's just being able to look past, oh, it's just me being, aren't you just being bitchy because you're setting this, solid boundary? And it's not that. It's learning that it's not a negative to set a healthy boundary with people really close to you, with people not so close to you, and everywhere in between. And then the other one is codependency no more. And that one has, of course, speaking to the child of an alcoholic, speaking to that part in me of realizing how much my self-worth has been tied up in other people's feedback because of, again, weak boundaries. And my self-worth is like, well, if you need to be happy with me. And if I achieve this, or if I do this, then you'll like me, then you'll be happy with me. And ultimately you get these real highs and lows, because if somebody's not happy with you, oh, wow, what a huge hit to the ego.
Crushing.
Mm-hmm.
Soul
Yep.
crushing. Oh my gosh. I will be downloading both of those. And I didn't know Codependency No More, Codependent No More
Yeah.
had a show.
Yeah.
I will be
Yeah.
listening to that.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So there's one other question I wanted to ask you, because I know that you really focus your business with women. And I always like to ask, what do you personally see as what it means for women to support one another, women supporting women? What does that feel or look like to you?
Man, I love women supporting women. And I know that it's trendy or sweet to say community over competition, but living it is different. I think I have had women who have loved me and radically invested in me when it's cost them something, when it's been inconvenient, not fun, hard. And I have been forever impacted by their investment in me. And then because of their investment, I have naturally turned around, and anything I know, I'm going to pass along to someone a few steps behind me. Didn't always get it right. I certainly was in no way a perfect mentor, but I was willing. And now I have girls who are impacted by me showing up. And so I have this beautiful imagery in my own life of what it looks like to be the one being invested in, and then what it looks like to do the investing. And I just see a net positive. Sure, there are some painful days. There are days when your mentee doesn't take your advice, or they flake out on you, or, they don't realize, how costly it is for you to show up in a season when you have literally no margin, yet you're making time for them. But those relationships that you go the distance with, that you're in it for years, that you get to watch someone evolve and grow, and you have a front row seat in their life. I mean, I feel like I cut my teeth on learning to love through mentorship, because it's not always pretty or convenient or rainbows and butterflies. So I love the women who have invested in me. They're not famous. They're not shiny. They were just willing, and in my sphere of influence, some were moms of friends. Others were people I babysat for. One was one of my youth leaders in high school. These women each invested something into me, and they deposited it in me. They didn't maybe have it all together or have answers for every single thing in life, but they were killing it in one area. So I decided, that's an incredible mom. I'm going to learn from her in that department. Or that's an incredible friend or spouse or businesswoman. I can learn in that area. She might not be crushing it in every other area, but I can learn from that area. That's tremendously impacted. So it's modeled for me how to show up for others. I don't have to have it all figured out or be crushing it in every area. That would be an insane expectation for anyone anyway.
I know.
So I'll just show up with what I have. And if there's someone that feels like it would be valuable for me to invest in them, I'm in. I'll go the road with you. I'll walk the distance with you. And so I am a big fan of women investing in one another. I think we'll go further together. It's not easy some days, but I think it's worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And what you said too, you're not always going to have one person who's going to be all things to you. I mean, that is completely unrealistic. And so having multiple mentors, whether somebody, is mentoring you financially or, parent wise or marriage wise, or, or maybe they have two areas that they're doing really well in or whatever it might be. But there's such value in having a coach, somebody who's a little further along than you are. Sometimes you have to pay for that. Sometimes you don't. But I just think that I know that working with women is something that's really on your heart and very valuable to you. So I think that that's important, because we as women, when we do come together, there's so much power, because women are inherently nurturers and helpful. And when we divide ourselves through competition and comparison, it's such a hindrance, instead of going, well, I'm not running your race. I might not be going the distance that you are, but maybe I'm going half that, but so I'm just having you help me get to that spot, not necessarily to the spot that you got to. I mean, you think of the best athletes in the world, they have a coach. That coach will never be as good of an athlete as they are, but they have a coach who can still see, the things that they need to be working on personally for them, and be able to see it from that perspective. So I think that's good. So the rapid fire final 3 questions. All right. So here we go. So what is the best piece of financial wisdom that you've been given?
Save for a rainy day, which you will probably appreciate me sharing.
Yes, indeed.
With your background. I built my business in this online space where you can build with low overhead, but you're going to be convinced to spend. You need that website. You need this. You need that. You've got to spend here. And I bought into it. I made a lot and I spent a lot. And when my business was leveled overnight while my husband was in college, so no sugar daddy here to sweep me off my feet, I had every opportunity to save based on what I was making. I was making like $20,000 a month. I could have saved for that rainy day.
Sure. And
when that season rolled around, it was really scary, so unnecessarily. And so I forever will be impacted by learning that lesson at 29. I'm glad I learned it, because it was a hard lesson to learn. Thank God I got a book advance 6 days before my business disappeared overnight, because that carried me through. I had like a 6-month window at that point.
Wow.
Like, okay, I've got 6 months to figure it out. At that point, we'll sell the house and live with our friends.
Yeah. That's good.
But now, I say, hey, maybe I'll grow slower. Maybe I'll invest over time. I'll save before I want to make that big expense, before I want the new website or whatever.
Right.
Versus just go for it because I have it in the moment. So that was a big lesson. That was hard.
Especially for entrepreneurs, that is a very common thing. It's like, I will tomorrow. Oh, I will tomorrow. Oh, but I don't know when my next, all these excuses. But yeah, and I've made the same mistake. So very, very good. And then what is a book that you would recommend, and why?
Well, is it bad to recommend my own book?
No. And if you want to recommend your own, and then if you have another one that maybe you're reading right now that you love, or one in the past, go for it.
I always go back to Present Over Perfect. That is not my own book. I am not Shauna Nyquist, but she is my all-time favorite author. Every single book of hers, but specifically Present Over Perfect, because I have such a hard time remaining present. I'm stuck in the future at all times. But I know that I'm my best self when I can get present. Yeah. And so I've never related more to the illustration in her book of just what got her to the point of valuing being present. She is a yes girl, more. Just like me, I feel like I'm reading a book from someone who is 10 years ahead of me, living the same exact life experiences. And so I will shout from the rooftops the book Present Over Perfect forever. 10 out of 10 recommend. Run, don't walk to get it. But I also just wrote a book called What They Taught Me About Mentorship.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, as y'all heard, I really value women investing in women, and have been impacted by the mentors who have invested in me. And so I wrote a book with each chapter detailing the lessons I learned from a mentor who was most of the time already in my life. But sometimes, I would share a story where I had to ask. I had to say, Harriet, I know we're at this cookout and I feel kind of like a weirdo asking you to be my mentor, but can we meet for coffee regularly? And so I really lay it all out there and how to look for mentors who are already in your sphere, your world, because I think each and every person who picks up this book will benefit from finding and recognizing mentors who might already be down the road from them,
So good. So good. Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to getting maybe a signed copy of it, perhaps.
I got you, girl.
Very good. And then what is a quote that you just love?
I love Mary Oliver. She's my favorite poet ever. And she says, what are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? I could plaster that on my walls. And it just reminds me what am I going to do with this life? I've only got one, so I'm going to make it count. And, is fixating on that to-do list really what I want to do with my life? No. Yeah, I get a little dopamine hit when I clear out my inbox. Yeah. But that's not it at the end of the day. So what am I going to do with this life? It kind of recenters me and brings me back home to what's important.
Yep. Can you say it again? Can you say the quote again?
What are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? Mary Oliver.
I love that. Love that. And so how can our listeners get a hold of you? I know you're all over social media, but give us the full rundown. How can we get your book, everything else?
You can find my book anywhere books are sold: Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all the places, your local bookstore. And then I mostly hang out on Instagram at Kelsey Chapman is my handle. And then my website is kelseychapman.com.
And we'll go ahead and spell your name for us too. Make sure we got that right.
KelseyChapman.com.
Oh, I love it. Well, you have been such a blessing to me. I had no idea that that your history and your current life and everything would relate so much to mine. And so, of course, if I feel that way, I have to imagine that there is a woman or quite a few women out there that feel much of the same way. And you're just allowing us to not feel so alone in it and know that it's okay, that we're not crazy and we don't have to feel shame for it either.
Well, the feeling is mutual, Arwen. I'm so glad to just have gotten to connect and realize that we're soul sisters in this journey together.
And I'll have to get out to Nashville. I was actually going to tell you, my husband is going to be there in like 2 weeks, and I have yet to be, I haven't been able to go. He's gone like 3 times and they just happen to all be trips without me. So next time I'm going to have to come and hang out with you and you'll have to take us around. Would love it. All right, my dear. Well, thank you so much for being on today's show.
Thank you for having me.